We both made our way back up to Green Barn on foot with our backup camcorder and bagged equipment. The sun glazed over the Shire through blue skies, offering a soothing warmth that rested on our shoulders. Not a drop of rain to be seen. We approached the entrance to the forest with last night's horrors still fresh in our mind. Charlie asked me if I was ready for this with an excited and exaggerated gusto. At this point, did I even have an option? I hesitated for a beat, and then nodded weakly. We began treading through the dense forest, aiming for the wooden gate that opened onto the long pathway that led the way to the barn. God, it felt like it took forever. The atmosphere became murkier with every step. We got to the gate and opened it, the loud creak making a few birds scatter from the treetops. Before we knew it, we were staring down the long, narrow path we had fled from last night. The hairs on my arms began to stick up, and a feeling of doom rose in my throat. That breakfast felt like it was going to make a reappearance, but I gulped hard and trudged on. Charlie asked me if we went left up ahead. From what I remembered, it was the correct way to go, but specifics were hazy in my mind. I said, yeah, I think so, with a questionable competency. I started to get fearful, and my legs felt like jelly again. Words of doubt danced on the tip of my tongue. I told him that maybe this isn't a good idea after all, and that we should turn back. Charlie had a different idea. He said it would be 5 minutes, no more, that this would be an experience we don't want to miss out on. This didn't feel like fun at all. I took the camcorder out and pressed the record button. The barn began to emerge as we turned left at the pathway, and a flood of anxiety charged into my mind like a bull. The outside of the barn looked like ruins. There were holes in the walls and in the roof. It was overly saturated in that luscious ivy, but mixed with weeds, moss, and other detritus. It was falling to pieces and had been for years by the looks of it. We walked up slowly to a broken oak door which was hanging on by a thread and a rusty chain. The door looked threatening and angry. There was a message that looked like someone had carved onto the door boldly. It was a distressing read. My property. Come in and you die. My heart was racing faster by the second, and I didn't want to go in. Charlie looked at the door, then looked at me, and fell silent. I could feel his doubt. He knew I wanted to end this right here. But suddenly, he sprung back to life and said, "Hey, screw this. Start recording," as he backed away from the door, ready to boot it in. I steadied my feet and lifted the camera, readying myself for whatever it was behind that violently carved message. Charlie lunged forward and the door caved in, followed by an echoing clash of broken wood smashing to smithereens on the floor. I stood in silence, waiting to be greeted by someone who wasn't happy to see us. But I could only hear sounds of birds tweeting being carried on the breeze. Charlie started shouting in a taunting manner into the barn. He was cursing and telling whoever might be listening to stop terrorizing people. He also offered him to come out and confront him if he dared. I stood frozen at Charlie's actions, and I thought what a stupid guy he actually was. I asked Charlie what the hell he was playing at. He looked at me and laughed a dumb laugh. I shot back a withered glare. I looked around the inside of the barn with an analytic stare, taking in the atmosphere of a place lost in time. It felt otherworldly, in a depressing sort of way. The place was smeared in grass and plants. No furnishings or decorations, just wood and stone. The air was thick and still. The floorboards creaked loudly, and it felt like they would cave in as soon as you stepped on them. There was also some rusty window frames and a withered skeleton of a chair in the corner. Someone's home is a projection of their mind, as they say. If that truly is the case, this is a person I do not want to interact with. Charlie shouted that he'd found a door, so I ran over to see. By the time I'd gotten to him, he'd already applied the boot method. This time, it didn't cave in, but returned with a stretched out creak. We were both left choking on the dust it whooshed up. I pushed it open and saw a long, unstable staircase that was being slowly eaten by darkness halfway down. It looked like it led to a basement. Before I could say anything, Charlie approached the top steps with his torch lighting the way. He turned to me and said, "Still rolling, yeah? Make sure you get a good shot of this," and grinned. I could have kicked his ass down every step of that staircase in that moment. I followed closely behind him, camera ready. But before I knew it, Charlie had fallen front first and tumbled down the stairs into the darkness. His torchlight bounced and flickered off the walls like an energetic firefly. I heard a boom, and then a sound of an object shattering on the floor. I got my torch out and aimed shakily down the stairs. I bellowed out to see if he was all right. Thankfully, he replied with a strained-sounding yes, and that his flashlight had stopped working. I told him to stay still, and that I'll be right there. I made my way down the stairs carefully as my torchlight uncovered the smashed object on the basement floor. It looked like it was a vase of some sort. I reached Charlie and thought it was time he knew he was acting like a complete fool. I asked him what the hell he was playing at, and that he should know not to run into a potentially haunted building and start shouting his mouth off. He looked regretful, but as he was about to apologize, his words were cut short by an old man's voice slicing through the air. The voice spoke in a fierce yet decrepit way.
"That was mine."
We both stopped dead as the unnatural low-pitched voice emerged from the dark corner of the basement. My hands began to shake, and adrenaline flooded my veins. I shakily lifted the camcorder to capture where the voice was coming from, but before I knew it, I was being yanked by my arm and dragged up the stairs and out of the front door. We ran down towards the pathway, feet shuffling as we stopped to turn around quickly out of complete instinct. We were some distance from the house, but we both looked up to see a tall, shadowy man standing on the roof staring down at us. He was silent and keeping very still. His figure was skinny and utterly haunting, like the twigs off a branch in human form. We ran down the pathway and dove over the wooden gate, launching ourselves into the forest green. All I heard was our panting and rustling of feet as we ran through the branches and leaves. We were near the end of the forest, and in that moment, for some reason, we both turned around again. The tall man was running for us through the trees. The shades and tones of the forest gave him a terrible, shadowy appearance. We both screamed as we turned around and fled as fast as we could. We bombed through the entrance of the forest and sprinted up the country road as fast as our legs would allow. We heard the sound of a vehicle behind us and flagged him to stop. The driver was going in the same direction as we were. We begged for him to take us to the inn and told him we were being chased. Thankfully, he opened the door and let us in. As he started driving away, we were both transfixed on the road behind us, watching as the tall man stared at us from the entrance. The driver let us out 10 minutes later at the inn. We thanked him for the ride and sped up to our room. We were scrambling and packing our stuff so we could leave. Charlie took a moment to pause and asked me if I'd gotten the man on film. "It won't be Oscar-winning cinematography, mate, but yes, I did, for sure." I made my way downstairs towards the bar area. The sounds of social chatter escalated as I entered the room. I walked over to the bar while looking around in a daze, seeing right through the guests enjoying themselves. The barman looked busy talking to someone at the time about what sounded like different types of cheeses or something. I planted my elbows on the bar and held my head in my hands, waiting to be seen in a distressed sort of manner. I looked to my right out of the back door, which had a lovely garden view. The rays of light from the sun lit up the green grass and delicate flowers. I then looked a little further to my right as something more menacing prodded at my peripheral vision. That feeling of sickness came back to my stomach with a thud. I could see a tall, shadowy figure sitting at a table in the far corner of the room next to the open back door. I turned my head around, pretending I did not see that man sitting there, and slid my hands over my face as they started to shake. I shouted loudly for the barman. Some of the guests seemed startled by my outburst, and I felt eyes on me as the room went quiet. The barman made his way over to me. Before he could ask me if I was all right, I cut him off by asking if he could see Fletcher in the corner. He glanced at the table and then slid his eyes back to mine. He said that there was no one there. I turned to look at the table once more, but the tall man had disappeared. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. Then I thought against that idea after everything I'd seen today. I figured we had been followed. I told him I was sorry and that we'd had a strange day. I asked him if he could call us a taxi for as soon as possible for the Queen's Arrow station. He looked concerned for me, as any decent person would in my state. I was barely holding it together. He told me he'd sort it out, and I smiled at him while my hands were shaking and my jaw was clattering. I went back up to our room, slammed the door shut, and turned to Charlie. He was pacing around the room. I told him I saw the man at the bar. He didn't quite believe me. His worried eyes were glaring into mine. "Are you sure it was him?" Charlie exclaimed. I told him he was staring straight at me from the table in the corner. We paced around the room for what seemed like a generous hour while waiting for the taxi to show up. We kept checking the bedroom window to see if it had arrived out front, but nothing appeared. I mean, we were out in the middle of nowhere. My thoughts turned into old broken records. What if we were followed? What if it doesn't leave us? All the what ifs a haunted mind could muster in a moment of wishing they'd never stuck their damn nose in. Eventually, a black cab turned up. We rushed out to the car and opened the trunk, stuffing away our equipment and suitcases on top of one another in a rather unorganized mountain of black leather bags. When Charlie slammed the lid of the trunk down, I noticed he had a stillness to him that appeared abruptly. A paleness bloomed into his skin, and he went all bug-eyed. I saw that he was staring through the back window of the cab, and then I turned to look. There it was again, that sickness, swirling around in all of its true malice in my stomach. The shadowy figure, bold and haunting in its form, was sitting on the back seat with its back turned to us. I walked slowly to the side of the car, keeping my distance and craning my head to peer in. But I found nothing but empty seats. He had vanished again. My heart was pounding. Charlie was still frozen. The taxi driver asked us to hurry up. I walked up to the car door and opened it slightly. I paused to look at Charlie. His sorrowful and wide eyes were looking back at me. He shook his head like he was pleading me not to get into the car. "Come on, let's just go." I got into the taxi and looked at the other door, waiting for it to open. Eventually, I heard a click of the door handle, and Charlie, hesitantly, got in. There was a coldness between Charlie and I. The driver asked us where we were going. "Queen's Arrow Station, please, and as quick as you can." The car pulled away, and we were in for the ride back home.